Part III, Chapter 12, Sections 1 and 2 of The Friendship of Christ, by Robert Hugh Benson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part III, Christ in His Historical Life. Chapter 12, The Seven Words, Christ our Friend Crucified. Section 1. We have been considering so far the friendship of Jesus Christ, and the various modes in which He offers it to us, whether interiorly or exteriorly, in the depths of our own consciousness, or in His representatives on earth, each in his various degree. Today we turn back to the Gospels for the actual record of that supreme pledge of friendship which He gave once for all, the manifestation of that greatest of all loves by which He laid down His life for His friends. As we look on Him crucified, we see a bewildering wealth of functions which He performs for us on the cross. Like a sovereign, He bears upon His own wounded breast all those orders and insignia which He alone can bestow. Priesthood is there, royalty, the prophetic office, sacrifice, martyrdom, all alike are jewels which He confers on those who follow Him, each in his own degree. But for the most part we shall pass these by. We shall consider Him from that same standpoint as that from which we have considered Him throughout, as our own familiar friend who trusted us, and who was rewarded by us with the crown of thorns, who yet is content to bear all this and 1,000 passions more, if at the end He can but persuade us that He loves us. He spoke 7 words as He hung there on Calvary, and each tells us of His friendship. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Our Friend has climbed the hill. He has been stripped of His clothes and laid upon the cross that He has carried from the steps of the praetorium. The executioners prepare and choose the nails. Those whose love He is seeking stand round looking down upon His upturned face. He, lying there, sees them, and sees behind them all those whom they represent, all those countless souls, each of whom He desires to win. And as the hammer is lifted and falls, He utters His first word: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. 1. And is such a word as this possible? Is it possible even for Divine Charity to declare that they know not what they do? He had lived 3 years in public as their servant and friend. He had helped all who came to Him, fed the hungry, healed the sick, relieved the tormented. Not once was it known that any who came to Him was cast out. Even those whom the world regarded as worthless, the ruined wrecks of humanity, the publican and the harlot, even those who had lost the world's undiscriminating friendship, found a friend in Him. All this was undeniable. It was even a matter of public notoriety. It was impossible to pretend that the world rejected Him because He rejected the world, impossible to urge that the world was in ignorance of His prodigal charity and large-heartedness. He had been a friend to all. One only excuse was urged: He was no friend, at least, to Caesar. But what they did not know, and it was upon this that Divine Charity fastened as the one loophole through which they might escape, was that it was their God who had done all these things, that it was the Creator who had been so tender to the creature, that it was the Lord of life even now whom they held beneath their hands. They thought that they were taking His life from Him. They did not understand that He was laying it down of Himself. They thought that they were ending forever a career of mercy which displeased them. They did not know that they were cooperating in a supreme climax of mercy. They knew not what they did. They knew then that they were outraging a human friend, but not that they were slaying a divine friend. They knew that they were betraying a fellow creature, that they were sinning against every code of human decency and gratitude and justice. They knew, like Pilate, that they were killing a just man, that they were taking upon their own heads the blood of an innocent person. But they did not know that they were crucifying the Lord of glory, that they were attempting to silence the Eternal Word. This, then, can at least be said in their favour: they know the horror, but not the full horror, of what they do. Therefore, Father, forgive them. 2. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. The world, as well as Jesus Christ, is the same yesterday, today, and for ever. There is a society in the world in which Jesus Christ dwells perpetually, and this society, like Jesus Christ, is at once divine and human. This society, then, the Catholic Church, is ceaselessly engaged in both divine and human works, and, like Jesus Christ Himself, and like every activity for good, meets with amazing ingratitude. Once more, in our own day, as in England 3 centuries ago, in Rome 16 centuries ago, this society is in the act of being crucified by those whose relief and salvation it is her one desire to bring about. It is, in fact, a condition of things which must be perpetual so long as the world remains what it is, though this period or that may exhibit the fact more startlingly. It is impossible to say that men do not know, at least in part, what it is that they do. They know that the whole of European civilization rests upon Catholic foundations, that the Church fed the hungry, taught the ignorant, befriended the outcast, and made life tolerable to the sufferers, centuries before the State dreamed of doing so, before, indeed, there was anything that could be called a State to do so. They know that she has been the mother of ideals, of the noblest art and the purest beauty. They use today, in every country of Europe, for secular or semi-sacred purposes, buildings which she raised for her own worship of her God. They know that the morals of men find their only ultimate sanction in her teaching, that where dogma goes down, crime goes up. And here again, the only charge against her is that she is no friend to Caesar, no friend, that is, to any system that seeks to organize society apart from God. But, thank God, divine charity can still plead for men that do not know the full horror of what they do, that they still think that to cripple and torture the Church of God is to do God service. For they do not know that she is His darling, and the bride of His Son, that she is the eternal city coming down from God out of heaven, that further, in these very sufferings of hers, she is accomplishing and applying divine atonement for the sins of those who crucify her. They know that they are outraging human justice, that they are dealing with a world-wide community in a manner in which they dare not deal with any nation, that they are severing the branch which supports themselves. But they do not know that in this instance human justice is a divine right, that in this instance a society is a body which incorporates, not the lives of men, but the incarnate life of God, that they are slaying not a prophet or a servant, but an only begotten Son. This prayer, then, is one which we can take upon our own lips. We have abused the French Republic and the Portuguese revolutionists and the Italian Freemasons and the Spanish anarchists and the Irish Orangemen long enough. In the very point of our agony we must learn to pray, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." 3. Lastly, it is for ourselves also that Jesus prays, since we too, in our own measure, have sinned in frantic ignorance. For here are we Catholics to whom have been committed the treasures of truth and grace, and here about us is the world to whom we have not transmitted them. We confess to a little sloth and lethargy, a little avarice, a little lack of generosity. We know what we do in part. We know we are not faithful to our highest inspirations, that we have not done all that we might, that we have shown a little self-will, a little malice, a little pardonable temper, and we confess these things and give an easy absolution. And yet we know not what we do. We do not know how urgent is the need of God, how tremendous are the issues He has committed to our care, how enormous is the value of every soul, of every act and word and thought that help to shape the destinies of such a soul. We do not know the tense expectation with which Heaven waits upon our whims. We do not know how here, in these minute opportunities of every day, lie the germs of new worlds that may be born to God, or crushed in embryo by our carelessness. We finger the jewels He was given us, and forget that each is worth a king's ransom. We play like children in the midst of a garden, trampling down the flowers which God can replace but can never restore. For it is a divine cause that we Catholics are crucifying every day, and a divine honour that we are insulting. If we could but see Him, here lies Jesus in our midst, with the marks of His agony upon Him, waiting for one to comfort Him, but He found none. He lies here, and we gossip and stare, and go our ways where the tragedy is done, when He hangs between heaven and earth, descended from the one and rejected by the other. Our God, whom we thought our slave, who desires to be our friend. Father, then, by this prayer of Thy crucified Son, forgive us also, for we know not what we do. But above all, is this ignorance of ours the more startling in that very aspect of the spiritual life with which we are concerned. We know how it is a constant experience of those who are Christians to meet with Jesus suddenly coming to them as a friend. There is scarcely an instructed Christian, at least anywhere, who, usually in his youth, though occasionally in more mature life, does not suddenly awaken to the fact that Christ desires more than mere obedience, mere faith, or mere adoration, that He desires such a friendship with Himself that its inception is no less than a moral conversion. It is a wonderful and a beautiful sight to observe a soul in this manner becoming conscious, as a maiden becomes conscious that she is loved, of the heart-shaking fact that her God is her lover. He comes as to His own, and His own receives Him. And yet, again and again, as in human love, so in divine love, the romance wears off, and the soul which a few years ago centred all upon Jesus Christ, a soul which reformed her life and arranged its details with the single object of growing more and more conformed to her Friend, which embraced devotion as her principal business, which concentrated her capacities and instincts for beauty, her interests, her emotions, her understanding, solely upon Him, which took a new start in life and a new centre from which to act, which sloughed off her sins almost without an effort in the sunlight of His presence. Such a soul as this, when a little while has passed, when the searching processes of the purgative way begin to sift her through, or when imagination becomes weary, or maturity dulls the keen emotions of adolescence, or when the dreary facts of the world begin to reiterate their claim to be the sole proper object of consideration, little by little such a soul as this, instead of tightening her hold upon her Friend, instead of clinging, even in a faith that amounts almost to a virtue of desperation, to that which has, as a matter of fact, been the most real and vital experience of her life, instead of seeking to transfer the image of Jesus from the romantic mood which has, it may be, passed, to the mature state which is now hers, instead of striving to cling to Him with her weakness in place of the natural strength which has gone, instead relinquishes the tremendous reality among the fairy stories of her youth, and counts Him and His friendship as among those illusions which, though natural to early years, must pass away as experience increases. She is still content, perhaps, to treat Him as her God, as the ideal of the human race, as the Saviour of men, but no longer as the lover who desires her among 10,000, as the Prince who has awakened her with a kiss, to whom henceforward she must wholly belong. And yet so seldom it is that she knows what it is that she does. She regrets it, maybe, a little. She sees that it would have been more perfect to have persevered. She even envies a little those who have persevered. She knows that she has been wanting, but she knows not how much. She knows not that she has forfeited the possibility of sanctity, that she has missed for ever 1,000 opportunities that can never come back. She knows not that, if it were not for God's mercy, she would have forfeited for a certainty even the probability of her salvation. Section 2. An hour perhaps has passed away. The screams and the blasphemies of the two tortured thieves have died to moans, and the moans to the silence of exhaustion. And in the silence the grace of God and the habits of the past have been at work together. The one on this side is still absorbed in his own pain, regarding it, contrasting it, turning it this way and that, seeking to adjust it. And the other is aware that there is something in the universe besides his own pain, that his pain is not the beginning and the end of all things. From time to time he has caught glimpses, as his head writhed this way or that, through blinding blood and tears, through the mist of dust trampled up by the surging crowds, of another who hangs in the midst. His friend has seen him too, but has seen his patience only as a reproach to his own torment. "If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." Luke chapter 23, verse 39. Yet this one sees more than a failure and a tragedy. He has heard, maybe, that the first word groaned out as the nails went through, and upon this detail and that and the other, his own darkened mind, the mind of a savage child, has been painfully at work. And grace has been at work too, in its mysterious operation upon that defiled and undeveloped mind, like sunlight in a filthy slum. We know almost nothing, after all our theology, of that divine process. We know a little of its conditions, a fraction of its effects. We have labelled a few by-laws of its working, but no more. This, however, we know, that the man to whom it came was not wholly self-centred, that there was still in him enough receptivity for grace to enter. 1. So little by little the truth, we dare not say the whole explicit truth, began to filter in. That darkened mind began to catch glimpses, that came and went and returned, of the supreme fact which the cultivated Pharisees overlooked, that the criminal was not wholly a criminal, that the thorns were not wholly a mockery, that the title above the cross was something besides a sneer. Pain is a strange magician when grace stands behind, an initiator into secrets, a high priest who handles and dispenses mysteries unknown to those who have not suffered. At least we know that the thief spoke at last, a greater miracle than Balaam's ass, that a murderer recognized the Lord of life, that a liar spoke the truth, that an outlaw submitted to the King. "Lord, remember me when Thou shalt come into Thy kingdom." He asks, therefore, for the least thing for which he could ask, that a king who will some day enter into a kingdom will not wholly forget that there is such a creature as Dismas, who once suffered by his side. He no longer submits a doubt, "If Thou be the Christ," but he calls Him Lord outright. He no longer asks for relief, "Save Thyself and us," but for some future remembrance. One day, whenever that may be, remember. And upon the word, the miracle happens which always happens when a soul begins with shame to take the lower place. As soon as we have learnt to be servants, we receive the place and name of friend. "Friend, go up higher." Luke chapter 14, verse 10. "I will not now call you servants, but I have called you friends." John chapter 15, verse 15. "For He is the one, cui servire regnare est, whose service is perfect freedom. This day thou shalt be with me in Paradise." Luke chapter 23, verse 43. 2. Here, then, is one of the most profound laws of the spiritual life, and one of the most difficult to learn, because, like all the fundamental laws of grace as well as of nature, it presents itself as a paradox. If you wish to be high, you must aim to be low. "He that humbleth himself shall be exalted." Luke chapter 14, verse 11. First, now, as long as self reigns within the soul, Our whole instinct is obviously in some manner towards self-assertion, even though that object may be disguised in terms of the love of God. Certainly a soul can win heaven by continuing to desire it effectively, but it is equally certain that a soul cannot reach the highest place in heaven, still less the position of an intimate friend of Christ on earth, from such a motive as this. That is, so long as self reigns. Until self has been denied and crucified, the soul cannot be, in the highest sense, Christ's disciple. We usually set out on our spiritual life aiming to be proficient, to make progress, to accomplish something for God, to render ourselves, in a way, indispensable to the divine cause. We carry, that is to say, into spiritual things the same ambitions and emulations as serve to make a man eminent in worldly affairs. We attempt, in a sense, to force our friendship on Christ, and to insist on that relationship to Him on which we have set our heart. We seek to bend the divine will to ours, to accomplish our union with God by attempting to change Him rather than ourselves. And we fail, of course, lamentably and ignominiously every time. For in spiritual matters there must be a reversal of the usual methods, if there is to be success. Certainly, blessed are they that hunger, blessed are they that are ambitious. But the ambition must be pursued not by self-assertion, but by self-extinction. For blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they that mourn. Matthew chapter 5. So, again and again, through a lack of the Christian spirit, even though we aim at the Christian life, we become disheartened and discouraged. We make no progress, and even if we do not altogether give up the quest, we at least begin to falter in it. Second, but on a sudden the soul makes a blinding discovery. For the first time, perhaps, she sees humility with her face unveiled, and in her eyes perceives the true image of herself. Then, in swift succession, follow discovery after discovery in addition. She understands, for example, that this self on which she has set her heart is simply not worth having. She perceives that there is not one of her good actions in the past that has been wholly good, for each that has not been done out of a merely natural generosity has been done largely out of this very love of self. She learns that her progress, for the most part, has been in the wrong direction altogether, that she has been accumulating merits that have scarcely a touch of meritoriousness, that she has been serving self throughout, in those very actions which she had told herself were pleasing to God. In short, that her development has lain only in an increase of self-centeredness, and that the self-control that she has learned by her efforts has been a vicious victory, as St. Augustine calls it, after all, since she has been striving all along to conquer God, instead of yielding to Him. Then indeed the cry breaks from her spontaneously, "Lord, remember me when Thou shalt come into Thy kingdom. Lord, remember me. Forget not altogether that such as I exist in that far-off day which I had thought in my pride was already past. That day when Thou shalt take Thy power and reign even in this heart that so long has been a rebel to Thee. Remember me when the supreme achievement of love has been wrought, and human nature has been made conformable to the Divine. dear Jesus, in that day be to me not a judge, but a Saviour. And then, by one more bewildering paradox, all is done, and the soul in that instant has what she desires. She has prayed that she may learn to serve, and with the very utterance of that prayer finds that she has been taught to reign. For she has learned the lesson of Him who was made in the form of a servant, that He might rule kings; of Him who was meek and humble of heart, and she has found rest to her soul. For His arms are that instant about her, His kiss is on her lips, and His words in her ear, "Today thou shalt be with me in Paradise." O soul that I have made and loved, who hast learnt at last to be my servant, come up higher, from my feet to my heart, O my friend. Now that thou hast at last put thyself at my mercy, behold, in that instant I put myself at thine. Take my hand and walk with me, now that thou art willing to follow me. For see, we walk together already in Paradise. Oh, this friendship of Jesus for the penitent! Just now there were three of Christ's intimates round His cross: the Immaculate Mary and the stainless disciple whom Jesus loved upon the one side, with the purified weeping Magdalene upon the other. Now the quaternion of His lovers is complete, for the broken-hearted thief has joined them, he who desired to serve, and therefore merited to reign, and he too already hangs in Paradise. End of Part 3, Chapter 12, Section 2.